we've started recording. We don't normally do this sort of thing, Steve and I. So firstly, excuse us if we're a little bit, not quite in the podcasting, flodcasting, slick world that everyone else seems to be. The purpose of today's video is to provide a tutorial on how to use the AMEC framework, and we're going to talk through our case study Decathlon without going through unfortunately, any of the commercial information that we can't share publicly. I still think there's a lot to learn on our approach, and that approach could be used for many businesses across the UK and indeed the world. So without further ado, let me introduce myself. I'm James Crawford. I'm Managing Director and Founder of PR Agency One, a top 150 PR agency in the UK. And Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Steve Lee. I'm Managing Director of Sensu Insight and also Director of PR Agency One. Been heavily involved with the agency since launch, and James and I share a passion for measurement and evaluation, and that's what we're going to talk through today.
Indeed. So you're watching this video because you want to see how you can integrate the framework, and I suppose it's worth saying that our framework of measurement predates the AMEC framework, but we'd spent years, maybe decades, searching for ways to measure PR. And there were lots of pieces of software out there. They were a bit too one size fits all. Didn't really hit the nail on the head for me, because every business was different. Everybody's communication objectives were different. Everybody's organizational objectives were different. What you needed to measure, completely different. Having something out of the tin just didn't really cut it for me. And I set about trying to track the impacts of PR from a commercial perspective. Whereas Steve, on the other hand,
yeah, was more interested, I think, in the reputation impacts and also in digital. And whereas James saw digital as a way to track commercial impact, I saw it as a way to track reputation and brand perceptions through content and conversation and how brands were being presented and talked about.
Exactly, and I felt that by measuring those three things, we were pretty much measuring everything that we felt needed to be measured to track successful brands and businesses on their communication mission, whatever that might be. Along came the AMEC framework, and I'm sure Steve can remember the day when I called him or emailed him about it. Said these guys are talking a lot of sense, because it was a flexible framework that you can apply in multiple different ways. There are certain rules to follow, but it's a very easy, intuitive approach that helps. I like to talk about it from the point of view, it helps you write up your measurement and plan out what you're doing, and leaves a nice trail of breadcrumbs towards the organizational outcome. We know that you can't prove categorically that there's been an impact, but we can show through reasoned argument evidence that there has been some meaningful outtakes, outputs, and outcomes. And depending on how well you can argue that point, you can make a strong case for a communications campaign being successful. So when this popped up in my inbox, or however I discovered it a long time ago, can't quite remember, we had a eureka moment. We thought, well, what we'll do is we'll incorporate some of the thinking around the framework into our measurement, and a lot of the language that is in the framework is used in our own measurement. It was very much aligned. We wanted to show people how much great press coverage they were getting, do all that great media analysis piece, key messages, total audience, share of voice, whatever that might be. You might be aware of certain tools that can do that kind of analysis, but we wanted to go further and track that brand and reputation tracking, and using the framework's structure for a narrative really helps probably move on what we do. So without further ado, Steve, shall we, without betraying any commercial secrets, should we talk a little bit about Decathlon?
Yeah.
The world's largest sports retailer.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably a big part of the introduction, in terms of a lot of people will know Decathlon if they've got a store nearby them, or if they go on holiday to France a lot. But again, if you live in Wales, for example, then you might not see a Decathlon that often, and it might not be something you're that familiar with. But it's basically the world's largest sports retail brand. It's in virtually every country in the world, and it's in the UK, and it has been in the UK for a number of years. But its store footprint has been growing more recently. So when they first approached us, the core mission that they set as their PR agency, or PR1 as their PR agency, was to double the UK's notoriety score, which was a brand KPI that they use internationally that basically means brand awareness. Now in the UK, the situation is very different to some of the other countries they're in that at the time when we were working on this, they didn't have complete UK national coverage, had much lower media spend than some of the other brands in the marketplace. So one of the things that the AMEC framework is really good at is that it makes you go back to the very founding principles of the campaign, and it makes you look at what are the actual organizational objectives, communications objectives that you're trying to achieve. And we kind of took this starting point of notoriety score and this ambition to double it and broke it down. So we started to look, for example, at their current brand awareness in the UK and broke that down by competitors, looking at the differences in store network and the difference in media spend, and actually looked at were they strong in pockets of the UK? How did that compare? Were they punching above their weight in terms of brand awareness compared to other brands' media spend? We started to look at things like their website visibility against key search terms and key content terms. We looked at perceptions of the brand amongst key customer segments and levels of engagement. And also we started to look at what the Decathlon brand actually meant to people. So using the AMEC framework and using that as a starting point for principle, we're able to take the client on a journey where we said, yes, it's important to build brand awareness, but let's make that a little bit more complex. Let's look at our core regions where we've got a storefront footprint. Let's look at regions where we don't have a store footprint, where it's a web-only brand at the moment. Let's also look at how effectively we're telling the Decathlon story. It's a unique business with some very interesting ways of operating, very interesting ways to keep costs down, to develop high-performance products. And again, how much was that coming across? A lot of these things are taken for granted in other countries because it's a bit like an M&S type brand in France. Everyone knows what Decathlon stands for. In the UK, less so. So again, what we're able to do using the AMEC framework was go back and actually look at, well, what are those objectives for the campaign, the corporate objectives, the communications objectives, and actually take one objective and turn it into several, so that we're able to prove the impact of PR and communications in lots of different ways, not just on one core. You could argue it's a vanity metric.
Yeah, exactly that. But that's, for some people starting off on their measurement journey, that might sound like something that's completely out of reach, or a difficult job to do, unless they use a partner like Sensor Insight. Worth checking the website, by the way. But still, there is a when undertaking a big project like this, you kind of need to break it up into pieces, and we had to start clearly with the brief, and without going into the ins and outs of what the strategy was, we had to undertake some PR and comms to promote their core products and also the brand itself and its values. That press coverage that came out of that, I can't go into the ins and outs of the strategy, had to be organised. And what PR people are really bad at is data. Sounds kind of obvious for some, but most people don't organise spreadsheets into the right kind of structure. So we developed, largely because we want to be able to manipulate large pieces of data to then prove the correlation on the commercial side. We put all the data into a spreadsheet in a really specific format that allowed us to manipulate it over time. So we broke down all the press coverage by products, by brands, by campaigns that were running, by whether pieces of coverage had links or not, or they follow or no follow. That was all dated, and lots more information. that spreadsheet incidentally fed into a Google Data Studio media analysis tool, which we call OneEval media analysis. It's provided to all our clients, which to anybody listening might be similar to, if you're old enough to remember Metrica. Metrica used to do media analysis reports, very similar to the type of report they might have done. But clearly we wanted to go further than that. But by organising the coverage in that way, that then allowed us to do some work on the marketing attribution piece, because we wanted to show that PR had a commercial effect. So for our clients who embark on a marketing attribution journey with us, what we do, or can do, is export Google Analytics data. I think with large e-commerce websites, that might run into the hundreds of millions of lines of data into something like a MySQL database. And using some fairly clever data science and knowing the dates of all the press coverage, start to look for correlations in terms of spikes in revenue or ads to basket. We focus on ads to basket because it's a very technical piece, but you'll be really surprised how many customers are lost from when a product is add to basket to when there's an actual sale. So we wanted to show that press coverage that had benefited from PR had more ads to basket than products that had not. And also looking at brand awareness and that had been generated from general press coverage that day to look for correlations there too. Can't go into the ins and outs of the increases in the public domain anyway, but rest assured there were correlations of increases there, which was very positive to see. And that was that was a major piece of work that was well received. So you've seen the video where Steve and I talk through our case study for Decathlon, and you might be asking, it sounds like a great case study, but how have you used the interactive framework or the AMEC framework to demonstrate measurable excellence? Well, we'd been using a lot of the language that the framework uses for quite a while, and we might have flown through a few of the details. What we found with the AMEC framework was that actually by going through this and just double checking that we captured everything, we did capture one or two additional pieces of information, and it just helped organise how we communicated our evaluation into language that lots of other people use, and really focus our mind on that organisational impact. So let me take you through it. Every campaign needs to start with objectives. These are broken down into organisational objectives and communication objectives, and we were quite clear with all our clients for them to give us organisational objectives, and then we help shape the communication objectives. So hopefully going further into saying they want to increase brand awareness, but going into the ins and outs of every single KPI. Around reputation, around commercial attribution, around the media analysis that we're providing. All that is documented in these two boxes here. The inputs here were really used to help us just define our target audiences a little bit more, focusing on the type of consumers that would shop at Decathlon, but also from a corporate perspective who they might be. And any strategic inputs, well, here we documented additional research that the client gave us to help inform our evaluation and measurement. Okay, so this box here just lists the activities across paid, earned, shared and owned media. If you don't understand the PESO model, look it up, Google it. There's lots of resources online about it. But often I think PR people focus a bit too much on earned, maybe shared, but let's not forget that owned media is a big player here for most PR people, and paid, of course. If we're putting any paid content behind Facebook or Google, it's important to document it. So these are the broader activities that we were undertaking. The next box, outputs, is what we actually delivered, the materials that we created, the things we did. Again, across paid, earned, shared and owned. it kind of mirrors what's in activities, but it's intrinsically different, and it really helps clients to understand what you've done. Believe it or not, clients aren't micromanaging you all the time, and sometimes other stakeholders come in. They need to know the ins and outs of what you've been doing. So this, the next two boxes, outtakes and outcomes. This was an area which helps us really sharpen up our measurement for all our clients, because we are very focused on outcomes and organisational impact, numbers, hard numbers, things that you can hang your hat on and say, you've done a great job. And so you should be, actually. They're the most important boxes. But outtakes, here, it taught us here just to think more about how the audience reacted, maybe qualitative feedback from your audience, tweets, feedback from customers, also from important stakeholders within the business, the CEO, the marketing team, that kind of thing. It's important to capture that kind of information, because sometimes if you just focus on the outcomes, the stats, it doesn't tell the whole story of the emotions and the effectiveness of the campaign. Here in outcomes, this is where the bulk of the data that Steve and I detailed was listed. This is where we put all the data on reputation, on brand, on the commercial attribution, on the media analysis, share research, brand visibility, whatever it is, all went into outcomes. And then from an organisational impact point of view, well, we could see, we could track the brand's improvements against key competitors. We could see growth in the company. We could see increased sales, larger store footprints, and commercial attribution from the PR work that we did. So hopefully that, guys, has explained everything that we've done. I'm sure you've got questions. We're a friendly bunch. Contact us on Twitter or at the AMEC Summit, and we can go through things in more detail. Thank you very much. There's a final box, of course, which I nearly forgot to tell you all about. So Steve and I, we don't tend to fill in this tool, but actually for a lot of our team who are learning the ropes, we do get them to fill it out, because like you see, there's text boxes in each box. You can actually fill this out. When you hit submit, well, then you can get all the copy that you've written about the evaluation and download it. We like to download it as a PDF, which is quite a useful tool. It really does help when you're needing to write up something about the campaign in text format. For example, award entries, that kind of thing. You find that this template actually is a pretty much an out-of-the-box award entry. Saves a hell of a lot of time. So don't forget to hit that last box if you are using that tool. And that's the end of the video, guys. So thank you very much. Bye.